Hello everyone, this is Ashley Tucker. Thank you for joining me today. For today's card, I'm going to create an ocean sunset scene using some Distress Oxide inks and some masking. The mask that I'm using is actually a stencil from Brutus Monroe, which has the shape of an oval cut out of it, and it comes with both the positive and the negative parts of the stencil. I started by taking a piece of Bristol Smooth paper, which is cut to be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and then I placed 1/2 of the stencil on top of that. I'm going to call this portion of the stencil the positive portion, and I taped that down really well. I also added some tape going across the oval so that it's kind of split in half. This half of the blending is going to create the sky for my scene, and I used quite a few different colors of Distress Oxide ink to create this. The colors that I used are Squeezed Lemonade, Wild Honey, Abandoned Coral, Seedless Preserves, Wilted Violet, Tumbled Glass, and Blueprint Sketch. Now, normally when I use Distress Oxide inks for blending, I do a circular motion with the ink blender, but because I'm blending a sky and because this area is kind of small, I decided to use the side of the sponge and do a left to right back and forth motion. I think that the kind of streaky look that this gives makes it look even more like a sky. When I was coming up with the design for this card, I was going through kind of a creative block, and I couldn't come up with any card design ideas. And I think that oftentimes a really good way to deal with this situation is to get inspiration from your past work. So I sat down with my sketchbook and I opened up my Instagram account and I looked through all of my old photos and I challenged myself to find one of my winter cards and recreate it as a summer card. So some of you that have been watching for a little while might recognize where the inspiration came from. It's one of the videos I did last year. If you figure it out, leave me a comment below and tell me which card you think it is. Anyway, once I had the sky all blended, I took some clean water and a paintbrush and I started to paint in these little cloud shapes. And then I took a paper towel and I dabbed up that water so that I have these very subtle looking clouds. And honestly, this is really easy. These clouds are basically just long scribbles that get skinnier on the ends. I did have to be a little bit more careful when I was getting towards the edges of the stencil with the paintbrush because I didn't want that water to seep under the edge of the stencil and bring the color with it. Now that that sky was done, I pulled up that painter's tape, and this is actually sped up really fast. I pulled that tape up really slowly so that I didn't accidentally ruin my paper. Once that top area was dry, I put down another piece of painter's tape right along the horizon line so that I could start blending my ocean. For this ocean, I used all of the same colors of Distress Oxide ink that I used on the sky except for Squeezed Lemonade, and I also brought in some black soot. I added the tiniest bit of Abandoned Coral and Wild Honey to look like the sunlight and the sky reflected on the water. For all of the other colors, I take my blending tool and I bring the color in from both sides of the oval towards the center, but I don't go all the way to the center so that I still have some white area in the middle. This creates a really nice looking highlight on the water. I was extra careful when I removed that piece of tape that was over the sky because I definitely didn't want to pull up any of that ink blending that I had done. Next, I took the negative portion of the stencil and I laid it over my blended area, and then I took this Waves stencil from Simon Says Stamp and I taped it down over the top of that. I then very carefully added some Fallen Snow glitter glaze from Brutus Monroe over the top of that stencil using my palette knife. Now this is a really sparkly glitter glaze, and I like the way that it turns out, but I kind of wish that I had used a transparent gloss texture paste instead. I think that that would have looked a little better. But yeah, there was no way that I was restarting this card because all that blending that I did, I wasn't going to do that again. And like I said, I do still really like the way that this card turned out. I just think that it might have been a little bit better if I had used that transparent texture paste. I let that texture paste completely dry. I think I set it aside for about 2 hours before I came back to it. And then I started to add some highlights under each of the clouds with a white gel pen. I also used that gel pen to add highlights to the water, and in order to do that, I'm just doing a bunch of little lines that are more concentrated in the center towards the back. I also drew in a little semicircle above the water to be my sun. It's kind of hard to see that in the video. It's a lot easier to see it in the pictures at the end. I used a Copic Multiliner to add 3 little seagulls flying off in the distance. This really reminded me of when I was a kid because I would always color in sunset pictures for my mom, and I'd always have to add in these little seagulls. They're really easy to draw. You just have to draw 2 little arches. I cut this background down to 3 3/4 by 5, and then I added some foam tape to the back and I mounted it onto an A2 size card base. For my sentiment, I pulled out a piece of Bazzill Licorice Twist cardstock and I prepped it for embossing with my powder bag. The sentiment that I'm using comes from the Tiny Words stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. I stamped that with Versamark ink and then I embossed it with Alabaster White embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. I then cut that down into a tiny strip, popped it up on my card with foam tape, and then I went over the top with some Wink of Stella glitter. I took out my white Prismacolor pencil and I added even more highlights underneath the clouds, and I think that this really helps to soften up those highlights. Before doing this, those highlights almost looked like they weren't part of the clouds at all, but after doing this, it really brings it all together. To finish up the card, I added just a touch of sparkle to the ocean with my Wink of Stella glitter brush, and then it was all done. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you really enjoyed today's card design. All of the supplies that I used to create today's card can be found in the description down below. And remember that anytime that you click on one of those links, you're helping to support this channel at no extra cost to you. If you enjoyed watching today, don't forget to hit that like button and be sure to hit subscribe so that you can see all of my future videos. I come out with new videos every single week, and I'm going to be back with another one really soon. Again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time.